Down 20 feet. That's a fairly typical lift for the third version of the Erie. In the original Erie, the typical lift was about 6 feet. The next lock down, lock 17, at Little Falls, has the highest single vertical lift in the system. We have back-to-back locks with greater lifts. But the highest single vertical lift in the system, that is 40 feet, twice what we're doing here. When Lock 17 was built, it was the highest single vertical lift in the world in 1915. However, today it's pretty far down the list. We actually have locks in the United States with lifts of over 90 feet, and the current champion is at the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River. There they have the ship lift. The lift boats up 250 feet. So 40 feet and 20 feet are rather modest by today's standards. As we're going down, you'll notice the ropes dangling down inside the chamber. Until the 1960s, we had 6 lock keepers at each lock, 3 on each wall, and they would help the tugs, the barges, the yachts with their lines. But as commercial traffic waned, the state cut back. Today we only have 1 lock keeper at each lock, and he can't help all the boats, so everybody's responsible for tying themselves up against the lock wall. The reason we do this is so if there's another boat in there, you don't want to bump into them. It's pretty easy to do that. They began dangling these ropes down in the 1960s to assist the yachts. A second way of holding yourself steady is these cables in the wall. That's what we use. A little different system, but we do it 6 and sometimes 8 times a day. So it's easy for us to get all set up to do that. The third system is these indentations in the wall. These are called Panama pins. They're actually developed here. They are used by tugs and barges. They'll have a deckhand that walks along with the line, and he or she will throw it over the pin as the boat goes up or down. You can see that they're staggered, and they can adjust accordingly. Now here's a salty tip for all you folks. If it's attached to a boat, it is called a line. If it is not attached to a boat, it's called a rope. That's the distinction. So these are ropes dangling down, but we use lines to tie up the boat. So we're getting down near the bottom. We got about another foot to go. As we get close to the bottom, you're going to see a little light appear between the gates in front of us. Those gates are much, much bigger than they look. You have to realize right now there's another 17 feet in the water. They're much, much bigger. They weigh about 45 tons. When they close the gates, they don't close them all the way. They leave them about 6 inches apart. They rely on water pressure to force the gates closed. They do this to protect the machinery. As the water level inside and outside equalizes, you're going to see a little bit of light appear between the gates right at the water line. This indicates that the water pressure is equalizing. And then, soon after that appears, about 10 seconds later, you're going to see that light shoot all the way to the top. That means that the springs, and there are actually springs in those, attached to those red arms at the top, the springs will gently pull the gates apart just a little bit. That pop was the sound of the gates unsealing, and now you can see there's a little bit of light right at the water line, and they will pull themselves apart in a minute. This is not done electrically. See it inching up, and in a minute it'll just shoot right up to the top. There it goes. Boom. The gates have just opened themselves. Now Dave can start the motors to turn on and open the gates the rest of the way. Thank you. Okay, so we dumped out 2.5 million gallons of water. We didn't hardly use any electricity. All just like draining a bathtub. As we leave the lock, if you look over on your left, you'll see a series of numbers, 64, 65, 66. That's our height above sea level. Are we 64 feet above sea level? We are not. We are 364 feet above sea level. That's how high the canal has raised boats to this point. Where's sea level? Well, of course, it's New York City, but they measured it in Troy. Why Troy? Wait a second, Dave. Troy's 150 miles from the ocean. Well, until the Hudson River gets to Troy, it's not a river at all.